Good afternoon, this is Daniel here with Cops and Cons TV. Just want to welcome everyone to our weekly live show. So thank you all again for being here, and just curious if you could put in the chat, where's everybody from? Curious to see where our viewers are watching from. You never know, we might have a case that we're going to discuss today that's from your area, and you might have some information on it. So what we're going to do here today, just like we do on these Friday live shows, is we're going to talk about just some of the most interesting and important cases in policing and crime news and stories about what's happened in the last week and a little bit before that. But really, since Thanksgiving, there has just been so much news and interesting things and weird cases that have happened. So anyone who's interested and kind of involved in the police news cycle, there's just so much. So we've got about 5 or 6 different cases to talk about today, and there were just so many more that we could have picked from. So if there's a case that you think is interesting that you want us to cover, definitely put it in the chat, and it's probably something that we can look at for next week. And just want to remind everybody, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel here and make sure that you share the live feed. That way you and your friends know exactly when we're going to come on so you can participate. If you want to go ahead and follow me over at Police Law News over on YouTube and TikTok, and make sure that you are subscribed to this channel because we usually do this live show every Friday around lunchtime, usually 12 o'clock Mountain Time. So thank everyone so much for being here. We have people in from Oklahoma, for Sweden. That's fantastic. The UK. We have Sophia says she's from Russia, Northern California, Minnesota. That's fantastic. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving and a safe holiday as well. And let's get into it. So while we're going through these cases, in these stories, if there is anything that you think that maybe information that I don't know about, or you have other information, or I like to go back and forth with people through the comments. So definitely put in the comments, if you have anything to say about these cases or questions to ask while we're going through. I definitely love to engage and kind of go back and forth while we're going through some of these cases. So the first case that I want to talk about, it's actually something that's going on right now. So it's very possible that while we're live on this show, that this case might get resolved. And it's the Antonio Brown case. So most people know Antonio Brown is a wide receiver in the NFL. He played for years with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Then he went to a couple other teams. He was with Tom Brady in New England for a while. And this is the Antonio Brown watch, absolutely. So, I think most recently he was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he did something pretty strange where essentially he left midway through the game. He just stopped playing. It's kind of like in Office Space, where it's, are you going to quit? No, I'm just going to stop going. He just stopped going and he left. It was the strangest thing. So people who've kind of been following Antonio Brown he's been on different podcasts. He has a music career now, but anyone who's kind of followed him or listened to him recently, you can kind of see that something isn't right with him. So he was on a podcast, the Patrick Bet-David Show, probably about 3 weeks ago, and I listened to it, and it just really sounded like he was struggling and he was just really aggressive the whole time. It was kind of reminded me of like Kanye West without all the racism, But anyways, what's going on with Antonio Brown? So he lives in Tampa, Florida, and he has 4 children with this woman, who's the victim of this case. And what he did is he put up some type of a makeshift note. Her and the 4 kids, they lived with Antonio Brown in this house. And what they did is he put up a sign that basically let her know that she's going to be evicted. So that she's going to be evicted from the house, and he gave her a date. I think it was November 28th that he wanted her out. Like he posted this note on the door of his house. At some point after that, they did have contact. During this contact, that's where the alleged incident occurred. So what the police are reporting is that it's essentially misdemeanor domestic violence, and what they are saying happened because what the victim is reportedly saying occurred is that during a dispute, he threw a lot of her stuff and her possessions outside of the house. While he was doing that, he threw a shoe at her, and the shoe hit her ponytail. And in talking with police, she said that there weren't any injuries or anything like that from being hit in a ponytail. You typically wouldn't see an injury. A ponytail injury isn't, a common thing in domestic violence. So, but, she said something to the effect of, well, I think that he was intending that he meant attempt to actually throw the shoe at my head. So, if you're throwing something with the intent, if the person is in fear, that could be assault. So it looks like there are some, and the police then went and got a warrant. So there is some type of a misdemeanor warrant for domestic violence for him now. So the police did go to the house yesterday around 7 p.m. Police officers with the Tampa Bay Police Department, they went to his house and they tried to contact him. Essentially, he wouldn't have any contact with police officers. He wouldn't let them in. And, he barricaded himself, inside the house, even though they let him know that, there is a warrant out for his arrest. During this, he also had contact with the victim again, and he told her something allegedly to the effect that if you try to come back in the house, and at this point, she wasn't trying to come back into the house, but he said, if you try to come back into the house, I'm going to shoot you, even if the police are present. So that kind of heightened the tensions of everything. And the victim did confirm that Antonio Brown does have at least 2 guns, and it was either a rifle or a shotgun that are in the house as well. So police have surrounded the house, and pretty much since last night, since 7 p.m. last night up until about 5 minutes before this show started, police are still surrounding the house and are trying to make contact with Antonio Brown. They have publicly said, this is the police department, has publicly said that, that they're not in any rush, that they're not trying to force anything, that sounds like they're just going to try to wait him out. So, we'll see. And I just have to wonder, and I'm curious what everyone on here thinks. I just have to wonder, is this how they normally treat individuals who are accused of or have warrants for misdemeanor domestic violence? So is he being treated differently because he's a celebrity, or is it because there was that threat? So not just what the warrant is for, the misdemeanor domestic violence, but the allegation that he did threaten to shoot the victim as well. Even though she wasn't present with him when he said that, you have to wonder, are the police treating it this seriously and kind of refusing to leave? Because normally for misdemeanor domestic violence, especially when the victim is out of the house and they're safe, typically that's not something that a team of 10 police officers sit on all night long. So let's see. Sergeant George Iska says Antonio Brown is as close to being as dangerous as Ndamukong Suh with the Detroit Lions. Yeah, absolutely. Haven't heard that name Ndamukong Suh in a while. So let's see. Yeah, so we'll keep you updated on that. If something happens, if there's any breaking news while we're on, we'll definitely get to that and pretty much report it as it's happening. But I'll be really curious if Antonio Brown, my guess is that he has food, he has drinks, he has everything he needs inside of this giant house. So my guess is if he wants to, he can hole up there longer than the police are willing to stay there. And, typically for a misdemeanor domestic violence, that's not the kind of thing that police officers are normally going to do any kind of a forced entry or throw any kind of chemical munitions in. So most police departments have policies where, you can only do those type of things, like breach entry, if there's some type of a felony crime. So I'm not sure exactly what the laws are in Florida, but typically they take civil liberties pretty seriously in Florida. So I'm guessing in Florida it's similar, and I would not expect the police officers to force entry for a misdemeanor warrant. Let's see, Ego 10, normally the police would have already brought the SWAT team. So I'm not, Ego 10, good question. So I'm not, so the officers who are sitting outside, that very well could be the SWAT team. I know that it's surrounded by police officers. Not sure if it's actually tactical members who are there. Typically you think it would be, because normal patrol officers who, work a 10-hour shift and they're supposed to be off at a certain time. So you would expect not to want to tie up those officers so they can't take calls for service. And typically to sit on a perimeter would be some type of a tactical team or emergency response team. That's what I would guess. And I think we have a poll up. Do you have Antonio Brown on your fantasy football team? Though most people probably dumped him after he quit halfway through. So that's the first case that I wanted to talk about, just because it's happening. It's not the most important case, but it's happening right now. So if anything happens with that, we will let you know. The next case that I want to talk about, and this is one that I guess there were several cases that were similar to this, and maybe I just haven't been following, but it's actually been in the news. So this is going back to December of 2020 in New York City during the Black Lives Matter protest. So essentially what happened is there was a Black Lives Matter protest somewhere in New York City. During the protest, a 54-year-old woman named Kathleen Castillo, she was driving in her vehicle, and she had her daughter, she's a mother of 3, she had her daughter in the car with her. Kathleen said that she was driving down a regular street. She knew that there was a protest, but it was a couple blocks away. She wasn't purposely trying to drive through a protest. She said that as she was driving down the street, she said the street appeared clear, like there wasn't anybody in it. She said as she was driving down the street that essentially people came out of nowhere, kind of from the sidewalk, and stood in front of her car. Ms. Castillo said that while they were in front of her car, they started to scream at her, yell at her, and in her words, she said that they called her a white privileged bitch. She said that they were not only standing in front of the car and preventing the vehicle from moving, but they were also pulling on the door handles and banging on the windows. At that point, the 54-year-old mother of three was afraid for herself and for her 29-year-old daughter. So she decided instead of in the moment, she believed that her physical safety was in danger. And so what she decided to do is instead of, let them beat on the car and break the window and pull her out and, drag her and stomp her face into the ground, instead of that, she decided that she was going to drive forward. So she did. She actually drove forward, and when she did, she ran over 9 different protesters. So it's my understanding that no one was seriously injured or killed, but there were 9 people who were hit by a car who were injured. So she left the scene, police were called. At first, she wasn't arrested. However, once the police did an investigation, probably some political pressure as well, she actually was charged. So she was charged with reckless assault. Now, reckless assault, that's a felony crime. That's a pretty serious crime to be charged with. So we have to think about this a couple ways. Is that, was she in reasonable fear that, her immediate safety was in jeopardy? Well, it almost seems like at this point, and again, this case is 2 years old. It's just getting to the court stages now. It seems like the DA's office almost kind of agrees with her. And here's why I say that. Here's the evidence for this. So again, this is someone, typically when you have someone who uses a vehicle and runs over 9 people, that's a pretty serious crime. So obviously the DA knows that there are some mitigating circumstances here. So the DA actually offered Ms. Castillo a plea deal. And here's what the plea deal consists of. It consists of no jail time, 6 hours of community service, and she would lose her driver's license for 18 months. That's it. That would be the extent of the punishment. So essentially, she hit 9 people with her vehicle, and the DA is pretty much saying, this is the lowest that we can possibly do. So out of principle, Ms. Castillo, through her attorney, has decided to not accept that plea deal. She's taken it to trial. So the attorney said that, in speaking for Ms. Castillo, that, she doesn't feel like she did anything wrong. That, she never wanted to hurt anybody. She never intended to hurt anybody. But through no fault of her own, she was put in a position where it was reasonable that her life was in danger. She didn't want to be dragged out of the car and beaten to death, and these people were banging on the car and they appeared violent, and that she took those actions in order to save her life and the life of her 29-year-old daughter who was in the car with her. So that's what the attorney said, is that, it's really a principle. This is a principle fight, kind of like they say in Always Sunny. This is a principle fight here. But you have to look at it as, so if she's convicted of all the different charges, she could face 7 years in prison. So, the conversations that her attorney is having with her off the record, obviously we're not going to know about those, but you would think any reasonable attorney would be saying to her, hey, I get it. You have a principle on this. Yes, you don't think that you did anything wrong, but here we are in New York City, a very, left-wing city. So the jurors are probably going to be people who may have some sympathy for protesters who are blocking the road and not letting traffic through. Do you want to risk that? You're risking, you're 54 years old, you're risking 7 years in jail, whereas here you could get 6 hours of community service, which is a joke. I mean, at that point, it's almost an insult. So just real quick, it's almost an insult to the people who were hit, the victims, I guess, to say we're going to give this person 6 hours of community service, no jail time. It's almost an insult to them. If I were a victim, I would say, listen, if you're not going to go after jail time, you think that me getting hit by a car is only worth 6 hours of community service. So it's almost an embarrassing plea, and they just should drop the charges completely, because obviously the DA's office doesn't think it's that serious, or that it would be very difficult for them to prove these charges beyond a reasonable doubt. Otherwise, they wouldn't be offering such a low and very unserious plea deal. So you would think that the attorney is probably, and so in cases like this, a lot of times what happens is, judges allow defendants to either plea no contest, which essentially means that you're pleading guilty, but you're not admitting any guilt. Essentially, pleading no contest would be acknowledging the DA's office probably has enough to convict me, but I'm not admitting any guilt, but it essentially goes down officially as a guilty plea. So a lot of times that would happen. There's also something called a best interest plea, where it actually takes it one step further, where you're not admitting guilt, and you're not even admitting that the DA has the evidence, to prove in court, but you're saying that given the totality of all the circumstances, this is in my best interest to make this deal, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. So you would think that hopefully before she goes to trial that her attorney will be able to talk her into either a no contest plea or a best interest plea. Let's see if there's any comments on that. She needed the Kenosha kid. Rich Spillman, that's such a great comment because I think you're referring to Kyle Rittenhouse. And that's something that I didn't mention that I'm going to get to now. So thank you, Rich Spillman, for reminding me, is that during this time, it's not like she's a regular defendant who's been able to go about her life. She has been getting so much hate. Not only on social media, but she's had to have police protection when she comes to and from court. She's been doxxed, people showing up at her residence. So she's really being harassed by, people who are upset that she decided to save her own life and not get beaten to death in the middle of the streets of New York City. There's a lot of people who think that was the wrong decision for her to make. So essentially she's been called the female Kyle Rittenhouse, which, Kyle Rittenhouse, he was not convicted of anything. It was proved that it was self-defense. So, them calling her the female Kyle Rittenhouse, they mean that as some type of a negative thing, but, really Kyle Rittenhouse is someone who was proved to have not committed any crime. So, if that's the case, then, I don't think that's that big of a deal. But yeah, she has been called the female Kyle Rittenhouse. So, we'll see if she ends up taking this case to trial or if she does take some kind of plea. Again, if I were representing her, I would do everything I could that, listen, this is not worth it. Even if it's a 5% chance, a 2% chance. I get it's a principle fight, but shit, you cannot risk 7 years in prison, especially. Again, if this was a Tennessee jury, then I think I like your chances. But this is a New York City jury. If you're in New York City, LA, or Washington, D.C., and you're looking at a jury of your peers there, and you're on the wrong side of the aisle, I don't like your chances there. Let's see. Ego 10, the people who thought they were tougher than her car were the ones who made the wrong decision. Yeah, they absolutely did. Ego 10, yeah. So it's one of those things where, no, you never want anyone to get run over by a vehicle. I mean, the goal is to have there be no violence. So that has to be a couple things. That has to be people in vehicles need to be careful and cognizant of how they're driving and obviously not intentionally hit anyone like Darrell Brooks. Like, that's a crime, and crimes absolutely should be prosecuted and people should face punishment for that. But if you are a crowd of people, and we have, especially during the protests of 2020, there were examples all over the country where windows were broken out of cars, people were dragged out of cars and almost beaten to death. So this has happened. So I guess what I'm saying is that for her to think, hey, like, my safety's in jeopardy, like, this is not an unreasonable thing for her to be thinking given the circumstances. And I don't want to see someone like that go to jail. So I'm hoping she works out some kind of a plea that, morally and mentally she can live with, and live with it, most importantly, not in prison. Let's see. Sergeant George, the self-defense claim is a double-edged sword. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. So, we'll definitely keep everybody updated on that. The next case that I want to talk about happened on November 28th, and it's a terrible case. And what this is going to leave you, as soon as you hear about this case, and most people, I'm sure you have heard about this, what this is going to make you think is, how in the world could this happen? So it happened on November 28th last week in Denver, Colorado, and essentially a police officer was shot in the neck by someone who was handcuffed. And again, you have have to ask yourself, how could that possibly happen? Because it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So essentially what occurred was an individual was driving a stolen vehicle in the Denver area. These are the allegations. He was driving a stolen vehicle in the Denver area. Police officers tried to pull him over. He fled. There was a short vehicle pursuit. Eventually, he stopped the car on his own. He didn't wreck out and crash or hurt anybody, which is good. But at some point, he stopped the vehicle, got out, and during a short chase, foot chase, that's when this individual was apprehended. So, he was arrested for having the stolen vehicle, for fleeing from police. A search of the individual and the vehicle found a couple other things. He had a shit ton of fentanyl, so they charged him with the, possession with intent to distribute the fentanyl. He also had a firearm on him. So he was charged with whatever gun charges go along with that as well. So after he was placed under arrest, 2 other officers came. They were riding 2 officers in a vehicle. So 2 officers were in the front of the vehicle. They were actually transporting him to jail. He was in the back seat. So while he's in the back seat, in handcuffs behind his back, somehow he had another handgun concealed and he started shooting at the officers, and he actually shot and hit one of them in the neck, obviously causing serious injuries. And this situation, unfortunately, does happen sometimes. And, typically it's one of 2 things are the reason why this happens. Either what happened in this situation where an individual has another weapon, another gun concealed somewhere on them that the police, for whatever reason, just didn't find during the search. Or, and this is more rare, and this didn't happen here, is that a police officer or someone in handcuffs is overpowered and surprised by someone who's in handcuffs, or someone who was able to flip their handcuffs to the front and do a surprise attack on the police officer, overpower them, and take their gun. So that does happen. That's, thankfully, that's more rare. But what happened here is it seems like there just wasn't a good enough search. And that's an absolute tragic thing that happened because a police officer got shot in the neck. Obviously, the police officers responded. Multiple officers ended up shooting this guy. He did survive, and he's being charged with attempted murder on a police officer. And I know that it's easy as a police officer to get complacent. I know that I'm sure that even myself, in the first 5 arrests I had, my guess is my searches were more thorough on the first 5 than on arrest number 2,000. So especially when, so it's easy to get complacent. It's easy to take these shortcuts, especially when you take these shortcuts and you do something, maybe not exactly how you're supposed to, but it's good enough. And if it works for, I think in this case, the officer had on 7 years, but if it works for 5, 10, 15, 17 years of doing it a certain way and everything has always worked out okay, just like with anything, with any job, you can see officers getting complacent. So this is obviously just a very horrible and sad, tragic reminder to always search. Good, always search for that second or third gun. It's really important to know that for police officers that your safety is more important than the temporary discomfort of anyone that you have in custody under arrest. Yes, searching them a little extra might be uncomfortable for them for a couple seconds. That's fine. Your safety is far more important. Also, and this will come out in the investigation, but you have to think, okay, let's break this down just a little bit closer, a little bit further. How could this happen? So, a lot of times when things like this happen, the officers who do the transport to the individual to jail aren't the officers who did the arrest or who initially put the handcuffs on. Usually those are 2 different groups of officers. The reason is a lot of times the officers who actually made the arrest, they're writing the warrant, they're doing all the charging documents, they're doing all the paperwork. A lot of times, the arrest process and the process of doing all the paperwork and getting the evidence could take, 4, 5, 10 hours. So if it takes that long, it's probably not the same officer who did the arrest and did all the paperwork who's also going to be the one transporting the individual to jail because, people have different shifts and, new people start. So it's very common for a new group of officers, maybe this happened at night and these officers, have already been held over for 4 hours. So it's reasonable to have new officers come in who, hey, we've got 8 hours left on our shift. And they're the ones who are going to spend an hour and a half taking someone to jail. So that's very reasonable. So you have to think when it comes to, so this guy had a concealed handgun. So you have to think, okay, so the officers who first put the handcuffs on, yeah, you have to search them at that point. point. But then there's a handoff. At some point, an individual, and it's not just a handoff, usually the handcuffs are switched as well. Because, I've got handcuffs, like, those are my fucking handcuffs, Like, if you take over my prisoner, I'm taking my handcuffs back, and your handcuffs are going on, right? Otherwise, everyone's handcuffs would get mixed up, and police officers would be fighting each other in the substation parking lots, and we can't have that, So it's reasonable to think that at some point, new handcuffs were put on this guy. And the rule is, and it's most likely it's policy, and female police officers often have pink handcuffs. So you don't want to get caught with that if that's not what you're into, But so you have to think that at some point there was a handcuff, there was a handoff, and the handcuffs were switched. So at that point, it's likely not just a good rule or good training or good practice. Normally, it's within police department policy that, hey, when someone goes into your car, whether you were the initial arresting officer or not, and you're transporting, they're now your responsibility. Anything that happened before, like that's someone else's responsibility. This is your prisoner. You are responsible for searching them again. A lot of the time, again, that's actually built into policy. So, it's also possible that this handgun was really small and that it was concealed in a way that, 99% of officers may not have found it, or he had really bad baggy pants on. That's why it's so important when you're doing searches to just be slow and methodical and just do it the same way every time. But, if you feel something, know exactly what it is. Because we can't ever so someone who is going to not only put the public in danger, not only put police officers in danger, but they're going to put themselves in great danger by getting into a high-speed pursuit with police officers. You just cannot ever underestimate the aberrant behavior that someone like that might continue to have. So it looks like let's see, Rich Spillman said, gotta handle everyone like a loaded gun. Yeah, no, Rich Spillman, that's a great point, 100%. Sergeant George, being complacent can get you killed as a police officer. Yeah, it absolutely can, and luckily it didn't this time. And Sophia, thank you for the nice comment. That is very nice. But yeah, so it's one of those things that's just a good reminder for police officers, and this is the kind of thing this is the kind of case that's going to be taught in academies, and instructors are going to come in and talk about to police officers in yearly and monthly training, and it's important to do so. And I don't want anyone to think, well, I don't give a shit if you think it is. This isn't Monday morning quarterback and saying, well, I would have done stuff differently. No, this is something that happened. An officer almost died. So no, we all need to be police officers. They need to be aware of exactly what happened out there. If anything, the goal is to prevent it from happening again. So it isn't Monday morning quarterback, because no one's sitting here saying, I would have done it better, or I always do things perfectly. No, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody can be complacent on different things. And this is just an unfortunate, tragic reminder that stuff like that, like Sergeant George and Rich Spillman said, can get you killed, which is a tragic thing. It looks like the officer is going to survive. They have serious injuries, and we will keep you up to date on that case. So, that case is that we just finished, kind of had, I like to do contrast when it comes to stories, is that case kind of had police officers, not really, there wasn't bad intent on the part of police officers, but this story is bad intent on the part of the police officer. So this is the Catfish Cop case. So I think everybody knows about this. This is an absolutely crazy case. So it's a police officer from Virginia. He was a Virginia state trooper for less than a year, so he wasn't a cop for very long. He left that job, and then he got hired on by another department recently, I think within the last couple weeks. What he did, he's 28 years old, and listen, I know that the media likes to play this game, but if you see his pictures, they are just creepy. He looks like a creep, and I know the media plays this game where whenever there's a police officer involved, they go and they pull and they find the absolute worst picture of the cop, and then they find the most handsome picture of the bad guy, of the murder suspect. But if you look at this guy's pictures, he looks like an absolute creep. But he's a 28-year-old former state trooper. He had been on the job for less than a year, just started with a smaller department in Virginia. What he did is he catfished. So, he pretended to be someone else online. Yeah, and I think it's important to say that if you don't think that Netflix is just itching to get their hands on this story for a show, you're absolutely wrong. They 100% are. This is going to be everywhere at some point as the next Tiger King. So what he did is he catfished. So he pretended to be someone else on the internet. Exactly who he pretended to be, well, it just isn't known. He could have pretended to be another 15-year-old girl. He could have pretended to be a 15-year-old boy. Who knows? But he pretended to be someone else online. He was able to befriend this 15-year-old girl, and unfortunately, she gave him her address. He drove from Virginia to Riverside, Riverside, California, which is about 2,000 miles. Once he got to her house in Riverside, California, she lives at that house with her mother and her grandparents. He killed the mother, he killed the grandparents, he set the house on fire, though the whole house didn't burn down. He set the house on fire, and he kidnapped the girl. Once he was kidnapped, the girl, he went off, and I believe eventually they were apprehended, and there was a shootout with police in a different state. It was pretty far away where the shootout actually happened. But one of the reasons why people called police in the first place and why they kind of got a jump on this, it wasn't just the gunshots and the fire, but as the 15-year-old girl was being put into his car, neighbors saw. So they didn't see the shooting, obviously, but the neighbors saw that, she looked like she was in distress. People called police early on because of that, because something just didn't seem right with how she was getting into the vehicle. So police were on this pretty quick. There was a chase. Eventually, the individual got into a shootout with police officers. He was killed. No police officers were killed. And I believe the 15-year-old did have some injuries, but she's alive, which is the absolute most important thing. Sergeant George says, the trooper's exactly the same age as me. I'm 28 years old as well. I think Sergeant George is, maybe he is 28, but I think he's trying to catfish me here. So it's, this guy actually was 28 years old, but yeah, it's an absolute tragic thing. And listen, I know that anytime something like this happens with a police officer, it's a really sensational story. And stories like this are tragic, not just because of what he did for a living. And I should point out that, the fact that he was a police officer, so this makes it a sensational story. This is going to make it a Netflix hit, but it really just isn't that relevant because there's no evidence that he did any of this on duty, meaning like he didn't catfish her saying he was a police officer. So it didn't seem like he was using his position as a police officer to do any of this. He didn't do this in his home state, so it's not like he was doing strange things on duty. And that's kind of what we're hearing, is that this guy just didn't have any red flags in his background, that he was hired by the state police, he made it to the academy, he worked there less than a year, then he transferred to a smaller department that needed police officers. And when you have someone who's passed all the training and, really literally doesn't have anything strange in their background, like, police department recruiters and police chiefs and people who are running police departments, whether you believe it or not, they aren't psychic and they can't look into people's hearts and just through their eyes, even though this guy does look really creepy. No one would know that this is something that could possibly happen when you've literally lived a life of 28 years with no other issues. So it just isn't, like I said, and it doesn't appear that, obviously more information could come out, but at least at this point, it doesn't appear that he did anything strange on duty. So the fact that he's a police officer just isn't that relevant, but it does make the case a more sensational case. And again, the employer said that there were no red flags or no reason why he shouldn't have been hired. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that. Let's see. Liz said, wait, so he was on one department for a year, failed field training, and went to another department. So, Liz, that's a really good point. So a lot of times, you're right. What I would think is that, so you have to think to yourself, okay, so you get hired on with the police department, you go through the training, you're not even with them for, and cops transfer departments for all the time for different reasons, and most of the time there's nothing wrong with that, right? But, typically that transfer doesn't happen within the first year, and that's for a couple reasons. Usually you put all this time and effort going into a police academy, you at least want to do something with that department that put you through. So leaving so soon doesn't make a lot of sense, and most police departments, you're on probation for a year. So, the way it is if you ever look at police departments are going to looking for laterals. So, officers from different departments to come and work for them. Most of the time they say non-probationary. So they want you off the probation period. A lot of police departments say you have to be working for 3 years. You have to be working there for 5 years. So, there aren't a lot of police departments who there aren't that many police departments who, after being on for less than a year, are going to take those kinds of people. So yeah, there have to be questions there. But, it's one of those things. Who knows what he could have said? And Liz just just so you know, there's no indication that he failed field training. The indication is that he passed field training and he had no open internal affairs investigations. So at least that's what's being, obviously other things could come out, Liz, but that's what's being reported right now. But yeah, you would think that, I mean, there could be a lot of reasons why someone transfers to a different police department. Maybe you're like, you know what, state police, oh shit, when I'm off probation, they're going to transfer me to the other side of the state. You know, I kind of want to stay local. So, you know, so imagine being, you know, a smaller police department and you have someone who another department just paid $60,000, $100,000 to put this guy through training. He has a good history. He's worked for the department for 10 months. He's done good. There's nothing NIA. And he goes, you know what? The reason why I want to switch departments is because when I'm off probation, they're actually going to transfer me 250 miles away to the other side of the state. And my whole family's here. I just don't want to move that far away. So that's why I want to lateral to this local department, because I want to stay local. So you have to imagine if you're an administrator and this is what you're hearing, like I could see a situation where you go, yeah, well, that makes complete sense. We'd love to have you, right? So, I mean, so there are reasons why people transfer departments, why you would transfer departments quickly into a career, even though, again, that isn't typical. Usually people have a couple years on before they transfer, but again, anything can happen. So yeah, this is just a tragic case because 3 people lost their lives, and I mean, in this 15-year-old girl is going to be scarred forever for this. So we'll keep updated on this case. Well, there's really not much to keep updated with because he was killed in the shootout with police, which is a great ending for him on this. But, you know, I think more is going to come out about this guy's background. Were there red flags? You know, that's really the takeaway for police departments, okay? Because, you know, obviously if he did this, you know, something was there. So is there something more in the psychological test, in the personality profile? Like, is there something that's what was missed? So not only the police departments who were directly involved, that's the investigation that has to happen, but it's also something for police administrators and police departments and sheriffs all around the country to see, like, holy shit, we cannot find ourselves in a situation like this. What did Virginia State Police, what did you guys learn after this? Is there something different we should be doing in the hiring process? And that kind of leads me to a point that I've been saying for years now, is that, you know, we want good people to be police officers, right? Good, decent, reasonable, educated, moral people who are patient, who aren't trigger happy. Like you know, these are if you live in a community, like these are who you want the police officers to be when you go to the grocery store, who are out patrolling. Like if you ever have to call the police for a break-in to your house or something, like this is the kind of person that you want to respond. Well, you have to, when cities and when municipalities and police departments don't foster an environment where good, decent, reasonable people like that, because those kinds of candidates and those people, they're going to have a whole lot of options, not just for police jobs, but for private sector jobs. So if you're a police department or community trying to capture these people in order to get them to be police officers in your city, you have to create an environment where those kinds of people would want to be a police officer. And I mean cases like this, cases like Garrett Rolfe, the individual officer who in Atlanta who killed Rayshard Brooks. He was charged with murder. Initially, the charges were dropped when a new DA came in, but after that, so the Rayshard Brooks case, you know, a lot of us can watch that case and be like, shit, I would have done the exact same thing. So if I were there, that would be me charged with murder. I would have done the same thing. So when you have people, how are you going to recruit reasonable police officers, educated police officers to come work for your city if that's the kind of stuff we're doing? And we're not talking about like the George Floyd case, because no, we can all look at the George Floyd case and say, I would never do that. Like, I'm not worried about that. So if that cop, if Derek Chauvin gets punished and convicted, like, I'm good with it. That's not something that I'm ever going to be worried about. But Rayshard Brooks, yeah, I'm worried about that case because that's the kind of thing that I think most police officers say, God damn, I would probably do the same thing. Ben Darby, the Ben Darby case in, I believe it was in Alabama. You know, Ben Darby, maybe we can get into that case in more deeper now, but he lost. He lost the case. He's in prison. He's serving like a 20-year prison sentence, and his wife is fighting to try to get him out. They have all kinds of appeals going, but you know, maybe one day we'll do a deeper dive on the Ben Darby case. But I mean, he was just convicted. He's in prison right now. And you know, you watch the video, you listen to the case, you listen to the wife and the body cam, and you think, well, shit, like I probably would have done the exact same thing. And this guy is in prison for it. So, you know, it's like, I guess the social justice warriors and, you know, people who are, you know, anti-police activists, it's like anytime that there's less police officers or police officers quit or they retire, they see that as a win. They see it go, good, this is exactly what we want. But it's not a win, because when you get that, you're only going to get people who, the most reasonable, educated, normal people who might otherwise consider a career in law enforcement in your city, it's going to make those people say, I don't want anything to do with that. No, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go to Texas. I'm going to go to where they actually appreciate police officers and they're not going to throw me in a cage for following United States law and the training that I have to have. So yeah, let's see. Rich Spillman, he could have gone... let's see, talking about the catfish cop. He could have gone with the feds to go 2,000 miles. Yeah, exactly. It was absolutely crazy. Let's see. No other comments on that. Okay, so the last case that I want to talk about, and this is from San Francisco. It's not really a case. It's more of an interesting policy that just happened, and it's pretty strange. And obviously, it's San Francisco. So the Board of Supervisors is essentially a board of 11 people who have been appointed, or elected in San Francisco, who make decisions, for the city when it comes to policy, when it comes to the police department, when it comes to policy. So here's what happened just recently. There was a proposal from the police department. So this is members of the police department in San Francisco asking for something. And what they're asking for is to have these robots, which they already use. The robots, they can walk into buildings and they could look around corners. They usually have cameras attached. Is that, what the police department in San Francisco was asking was to be able to allow to arm those robots in deadly force situations with explosives in order to end deadly force situations. So that's what they did. That's what they were essentially looking at. So let's get into each side of this debate. But even though it's San Francisco, when I first read about that, this was going to go up to the Board of Supervisors. Maybe I'm just profiling, but I'm thinking this is never going to pass. Like San Francisco, it was only in the last couple of years they wouldn't let cops have tasers, which is nuts. So I'm like, there's no way this is going to pass, but it actually did. It passed 8-3. So 3 people were against it, 8 people were for it. So now San Francisco police officers are going to be able to do this. And if you read the media coverage, and the media coverage on this is everywhere, they only talk about this and they make it seem like it's this strange thing that's never happened before, but it has happened before. In a very famous case a couple years ago, and I'm going to tell you that at the end, and I'm going to kind of loop all this together. But they're basically saying that like they're making it seem like police are using technology to kill people. And no, that absolutely is not what this is. So if it's a robot, you have to think about it this way. Police officers, it's not artificial intelligence, okay? It's not like it's alien technology or AI or anything like that. It's police officers who are controlling the robot. If a police officer controls the robot, and then there's force that is used, or a deadly force, all the liability and everything is on that individual police officer. That's who it's on. So it's not like it's outsourced to like some artificial intelligence or anything like that. That isn't the case. So so basically what they were asking for, and so it did pass. Here's a couple things about it. So they can only use it in deadly force situations, which is reasonable, which this is absolutely what it's for. And the approval can't just be a regular field cop on the street, 28-year-old out of Virginia who's catfishing people all crazy. It's not like someone like that can approve this. In the city of San Francisco, there's actually only a couple people who are at the very top levels of the police department. So they're more like politicians, right, than they are police officers. But the admin who run the department, there's actually only a couple of them who can actually approve this. And here's the kind of situation that it would be for. It would be for a deadly force situation. So it would be for a situation where deadly force is authorized and all other options is not possible or safe. So here's what I mean by that. Imagine you have a situation of someone who is actively firing a gun at police officers. Maybe they've already killed someone or they're threatening to, but they have a firearm, they're barricaded, and they're actively shooting at police officers. So this is the situation for that. So after negotiation and this is in the policy as well in San Francisco, after there's negotiation for hours, after there's negotiation for hours, after they've tried other things, and they can show, hey, there's nothing else that we can do, and now we have a couple options. We could send in a SWAT team to go try to take this guy into custody and deal with that, but he's shooting at us. Or we can go ahead and use this robot in order to stop the actions of, in order to preserve life and to save anyone else from death. So that's basically what it's for. And if you have to look at it, okay, like, well, what's the safest thing? Well, for the bad guy, if bad guy is shooting at police officers, he's going to die either way, right? Or get shot either way. Because if you're shooting at police officers, we can expect them to shoot back. Like, that's reasonable, right? So whether it's police officers shooting at the bad guy or they send in a robot that there's an explosion and it kills the guy, like, the result is the same for him. But what's safer for police officers? Well, clearly, being able to remotely operate a robot and do that is much safer than sending in 8 guys and girls on a tactical team, who are going to be taking fire and people are shooting at their faces. Like, so that's obviously more safer. But how about the public? Because that's what people really want to hear about. What's safer for the public? So you have to think, well, it would obviously be safer for the public if there's a robot. But the public and people are always, it seems to happen quite often, not just rogue rounds from police officers, but, rogue and unintentional bullets from the bad guy. Because if he's shooting everywhere, so in every situation, this would be safer. And here's exactly where this was used. And this is the thing that's a little bit frustrating. Not a little bit, it's really frustrating about this, is because in all of the articles that I read about this over the news and reported on CNN and MSNBC and NPR over the last couple days, not once did they mention this case when a robot was used and it was absolutely the most reasonable thing to do. And I'm talking about a case that happened in Dallas in 2016 at a Black Lives Matter protest. So there was a Black Lives Matter protest going on in 2016. I know a lot of people think that Black Lives Matter, were they even around in 2016? They were. They were actually created after the Trayvon Martin shooting in 2013. But there was a Black Lives Matter protest in Dallas in 2016. A Black Lives Matter activist, he's also a former military member. He had a rifle, and he basically took a sniper position and he started shooting at police officers during this protest. So the police officers, not that it would justify it, but they weren't engaged in throwing gas cans. They were literally just standing there, making sure that everyone was peaceful. Like, they weren't doing anything that you would look at and say, what the hell are they doing? They were just standing there from a sniper position with a rifle. He shot and killed 5 Dallas police officers and he injured 7 more. He then barricaded himself in a parking garage. Obviously, there was a huge police response. Police officers engaged in a gun battle with this guy for 45 minutes. So think about that. A lot of times officer-involved shootings are 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 seconds, 45 minutes, 11 different police officers engaged in a gun battle with this guy. They also went for 2 hours of negotiations as well. And he essentially said he's not coming out. He's going to keep shooting at cops. So the decision was made from essentially the highest levels of the Dallas Police Department that they were going to send in this robot that there was going to be a robot. It was going to explode, and essentially it was going to kill him. And that was the decision that was made. Obviously, in this case, it went to the grand jury to see if there were going to be any charges. Every officer who was involved, and not just in operating the robot, but helping to set up the robot, officers who were also in the chain of command, all of the officers who were involved in the shooting, all of the officers involved in this case, they were all cleared by the prosecutor and a grand jury. And it's essentially been, pretty universally known that this was the absolute best thing that the police officers could have done in a situation like this. So like I said, so it was just utilized not that long ago. But no one really criticizes that, because it was just the best way to end the situation. But in talking about the San Francisco thing, they make it, the media makes it seem like this is something new, that this has never happened before, that it's out there and this is crazy. Again, that is not the case. So yeah, just wanted to mention that back. Yeah, and it was, let's see. Yeah, it was ex-military members with the Dallas Police Department. They were the ones who conducted the plan with the robot. It was actually approved all the way up through the police chief. It actually happened on it was a parking garage on a college campus where this happened. Let's see. Rich Spillman, please do not stand in the blast radius of our bomb robot. Please don't do that. It's a bomb. Liz says it's a bomb squad robot retrofitted. Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And, again, cases like this, I always say that it's you want police officers to be able to have as many tools as possible. So, you want police officers to have this option. Yes, they can only use this option under a very limited set of circumstances. It has to be a situation with deadly force, but it's good to have, it's just like with tasers. Like, no, you can't tase everybody, but it's good to have that option, right? So we're going to talk about one more case. that is kind of more of a funny case. But I'm going to talk about one more thing before we go. But I just want to thank everyone again for being here today on the show, on the live. The comments were great. I want to thank you again. If you haven't already, make sure that you follow the channel. You know, we typically do this 12 o'clock Mountain Time on Fridays during lunchtime. So just want to put that out there. But the last thing that I want to talk about here is everybody's favorite character, Jeremy DeWitt. So Jeremy DeWitt, Motor One, he was in jail for like 18 months or 12 months or something like that. Whatever his sentence was, I think it was like 18 or 16 months. It was cut short by like 2 or 3 months. So he was released, and within the last couple days, Jeremy DeWitt, he was rearrested. Apparently, there was a violation of probation. So essentially, when something like this happens, when you're supposed to be in for 16 months, but you get out after 14 months, for those extra 2 months that the judge and the courts and the government has control over you, they basically say, okay, you're going to be on probation. So here are the restrictions. So one of the restrictions, and most people are like, shit, I'll take any restrictions I possibly can. Just let me be free. I do not want to be in jail. So one of the restrictions that Jeremy DeWitt had to delete and get rid of, totally denounce and get rid of his YouTube channel. And he just couldn't find it within himself to do it. So, he didn't do it as he's being arrested. And he wasn't arrested nicely. This was another standoff. And, luckily they didn't send a robot in after him or anything like that. But he wouldn't come out of his house for a while, for several hours. He holed up. Eventually, he was arrested. Some of the and we are trying to get we have some, just so you know, we have submitted a request, like a lot of media outlets, for the body cam footage. So as soon as we get that body cam footage, we'll definitely get it up here on the channel for you guys to go over. But Jeremy DeWitt has never said no to a camera. So, as he's being let out in handcuffs, some of the media members are there and they're filming him, and he's saying, like, they're saying I didn't delete my YouTube channel, and he's saying, well, I couldn't delete it. Like, it was hacked. I don't have access to it anymore. So that seems to be the excuse he was going with. All Jeremy DeWitt had to do was to delete his YouTube channel. He wouldn't do it. He's saying it's hacked, and that's why he's in jail again. So it seems like he'll be in jail, at the most until the end of his sentence. So it was either 1 or 2 months. I think 6 to 8 weeks. His sentence was cut short. So you would think that's all the power the court would have over him, right? Is to basically extend that time instead of being at his house. That he's going to have to be in jail. So Jeremy DeWitt, Jeremy DeWitt Watch. We're always on it. We have to be. So if there's any updates on that case, we will let you know. One more comment. Sergeant George says Jeremy DeWitt must have been a magnet for a police officer to go after him. Yes, initially, yes, I think so. But this was actually a warrant from the judge. So it was actually the judge issued the warrant and sent the police officers out to get him. So again, I want to thank everyone for coming out to the live show. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for the good comments. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends. I hope everyone has a great and safe weekend. Thank you.